start today with the situation over at Starbucks. This has now become a national issue. So Starbucks is supposed to shut down every one of its stores for a day next week because there was apparently an incident in which two black guys were at a Philadelphia Starbucks and sat down, and the manager asked them if they wanted to buy anything, and they said no. And according to them, at this point, she called the police. According to her, they continuously refused to leave. They were just loitering, and she called the police. The police came. The police apparently asked these guys to leave. The guys refused over and over, at which point the police arrested them. So Starbucks has, of course, apologized for the incident. The woman in question has not been fired. She apparently no longer works at this store, which makes me a little suspicious. It does make me a little suspicious. It makes me a little suspicious that Starbucks didn't just fire the lady. If they actually thought that there was a deeply racist incident that had happened, you would imagine that they would get rid of the lady for simple legal reasons. Having this woman hanging around, if she actually was participant in a racial incident, seems like really stupid policy. But Starbucks didn't get rid of her, which leads me to believe there might be a little bit more to the story. So today I want to go through the media hubbub about all of this, and I want to ask a few simple questions that are all answerable. This is not truthering. I'm not saying I don't believe these guys' story. I'm just saying that I want to see the evidence on all sides, and I don't think that that's unreasonable. So, for example, the guys go on Good Morning America, the two black fellows go on Good Morning America, and they are being given national coverage for an incident in which they were threatened with arrest for apparently sitting in a Starbucks for no reason. And the tape was originally taken by a woman, by a couple of different people who were at the Starbucks and who claimed that they saw this racial incident unfold. When the guys asked to use the bathroom, they were told they couldn't use the bathroom because they hadn't bought anything, and then they refused to buy something. And the manager, whose name is Holly, apparently called the police for loitering. So here is a little bit of the ABC News exclusive interview with these two guys. Now, again, I have to point out that this is being wildly overblown. Okay, the lady is presumably being punished. The Starbucks has apologized. They're shutting down their entire company for a day to teach about implicit bias. I'll discuss implicit bias and how stupid implicit bias assessment tests are in just a second, and why implicit bias training is completely useless from a social science perspective. I'll talk about that in just a few minutes here. But important to note, Kyle Smith has a good point in National Review. There are 238,000 employees of Starbucks. Let's assume that everything that's said here is right. Let's assume that this manager at the Starbucks was a brutal, horrible, Bull Connor type racist. Would that implicate everyone who works for Starbucks? Kyle Smith points out 238,000 people is like the entire population of the city of Richmond. If someone killed somebody in the city of Richmond, would you say, listen, I'm never traveling to Richmond again, I'm going to boycott Richmond? Would you force the entire population of Richmond to go and get implicit bias training? Or would you say, that's a bad person? Right. So first of all, this is an individual issue at the very most. And second of all, we're not even sure if it's an individual issue yet because, as I'm going to point out, there are cameras in the store. Like, this is an amazing thing. I'm amazed nobody's asked this before. I've been asking this for the last couple of days. Every Starbucks I've ever been in has cameras. They have cameras there because they want to ensure that if a crime actually does take place on the premises, that they can hand that tape over to the police. So I asked my listeners to actually go over to this Starbucks. I asked one particular listener who had actually been to the Starbucks, knew the manager, said that this manager was a social justice warrior leftist who is so woke that she spends her days telling people not to use the wrong pronouns. And yet this one is supposed to be the great racist in the whole story. She still has not publicly revealed herself or told her side of the story. But in any case, I asked a couple of my listeners and one of my Twitter followers if they could go take a look at the Starbucks itself to see if there were a bunch of cameras there. It turns out that from the picture she took, there are no less than 4 cameras in the establishment. And yet we have seen no camera tape from any of this. The only reason I'm breaking this down this way, folks, is because it's a national story. Otherwise, I wouldn't care. Because I'll give you an example. There's a story from Applebee's. Right? There was an Applebee's, I believe that it was in Wisconsin, and just back in February, it was Missouri rather. Applebee's fired 3 employees at a Missouri mall-based restaurant back in February that it determined were involved in the racial profiling of 2 African-American customers, whom they falsely accused of skipping out without paying their bill. The restaurant chain also apologized for the February 9th incident at the Independence, Missouri eatery. The apology comes after one of the diners, Alexis Brisson, posted a video of her encounter with employees from her cell phone and commented on the incident on Facebook. The restaurant in the Independence Center Mall was temporarily closed, and the video showed a restaurant staffer, a police officer, and a security guard talking to 2 women, one of whom was crying uncontrollably. It had been estimated viewed 3 million times. The company said that it regretted the incident, and the manager, the server, and another employee were fired. Okay, this is an incident where I'm not questioning what happened because the company fired the employees. The company not only admitted what had happened, the company then fired the employees. And apparently, this is a much more clear-cut case where the police were called on these particular women who were accused of walking out on their bill, but they did not walk out without paying their bill. They actually were trying to pay their bill. Right? According to the Facebook post, about an hour into dinner, these two women were accused of ordering food the day before and leaving without paying their bill. And then it turns out that these were not the same two women. So the employees were fired. Okay, so that's an easy one to prove, right? There's either evidence that they were there the day before or they weren't there the day before, right? It turns out the employees were all wrong and they were all fired. So in that particular case, I'm not saying show me the tape. In this particular case, I'm saying show me the tape because there's a little bit of countervailing evidence. And you're going to see the countervailing evidence here. So I'm going to play you the account of the two men who are on Good Morning America. Again, this is now a national incident, even though it's at best one person at a Starbucks in Philadelphia. Important to point out that this manager, Holly, she's working at a Starbucks in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is 42% black. If you really think that Holly has not dealt for the past year with any black customers or that she's a wild racist who's discriminating against black customers, it's weird that everything was fine for a year in a 42% black city where presumably a lot of the customers are black. And again, as I say, one of my listeners, I talked about this yesterday on the program, one of my listeners knows Holly, has been there and has seen her deal with black customers and has never seen any inkling of anything like this. But, all right, here's the account of the two men on Good Morning America. And I'm going to show you this even conflicts with the police accounting of what happened. I want to show you also how the media treat this. So Robin Roberts is the one doing the interview on ABC News' Good Morning America. Here it is.
Dante, you both walk in, you get a table. Rashawn, how long was it before you asked to use the restroom?
Immediately, as soon as I walked in. And she stated that they were for paying customers only.
What happened next?
We're at the table. We sit down. We're just talking amongst each other. She then comes from around the register, walks up to us, asks if, she can help us with anything. Can we start with some drinks or water or something like that? For when we have bottles of water with us. So, we're fine. We're just waiting for a meeting. We'll be out really quick type thing.
According to 911 accounts, a call was placed at 4:37, approximately 2 minutes after you arrived, to 911. What did you think when you saw police arrive, Dante?
It can't be here for us.
Okay, so let's pause it there for 1 second. So first thing to note here is when she says that they arrived at 4:35 and then the call happened at 4:37, how does she know what time they got there? Right? I mean, she's not revealing how she knows that because presumably she'd either have to have testimony from Starbucks itself, she'd have to have access to tape, she'd have to have witnesses who said 4:35, or these guys told her they got there at 4:35, and at 4:37, this woman made a call. We just don't know the answer. Now, this is one of the areas where tape could obviously clear this up. You'd see them walk in, there'd be a timestamp on the tape, you'd know whether this is true or not. According to the police, this is not what happened, right? If you actually listen to what the police officer said, right, it doesn't match up with what these two guys are saying. So these two guys are saying that they walked in, they sat down, they asked to use the restroom, they were declined because they did not buy anything. They were asked if they wanted to buy anything, and then they refused to leave because they were waiting for somebody. Okay, that's their story. Now here is the police officer's story. So here's the police chief in Philadelphia who is black, and he is telling the story of what happened according to the police.
When the call was initially made, the Starbucks employees had told the males that they were going to call police, and they said, go ahead and call police. We don't care. So police get there, and they're confronted by the same type of attitude, and repeatedly are told that they're not leaving. In fact, there's some alleged rhetoric about you don't know what you're doing. You're only a $45,000 a year employee or something to that regard. And so because these individuals refused to leave, because Starbucks actually called, the police did not just happen upon this event. They did not just walk into Starbucks to get coffee. They were called there for a service, and that service had to do with quelling a disturbance that had to do with trespassing. So I need to underscore the fact that these males were arrested. When they were arrested, they were taken out essentially without incident. There was no harm done to them. But after being transported to the police district in the area, the officers, after processing paperwork, discovered that Starbucks no longer was interested in prosecuting.
Okay, so listen to the police. So what the police chief says is when they arrived, they asked these men, do you want to leave? And the guy said, no, we're not leaving. And apparently at one point they said, we don't care, go ahead and arrest us. Okay, this is not the same story the media are telling, right? The media are telling a story where these two guys walk in, they're no trouble at all. They're just sitting there, and then they're arrested for no reason after being incredibly polite to the police officers. The police themselves are saying that's not what happened. We don't have the story of Holly, the manager. We don't have any of the tape footage, right? Again, there are 4 cameras in the establishment from what I can see from these pictures that are being sent publicly on social media. And this has been confirmed by a couple of people. And yet the media are running this as though this is a Bull Connor, Jim Crow story. I'm going to explain in a second why this really isn't even that. But first, I want to say thank you to our sponsors over at Filter Buys.